Hello and welcome back to my channel. In this video, I will be going through 3 different quilt blocks as a practice for my goal of creating a quilt this year in 2024. So I decided I want to start by creating 3 different quilt blocks and just attempting to do the quilt blocks, use a quilting foot, and use fabric that I got from the Dollar Tree as practice fabric for my upcoming quilt project. So the first quilt block that I decided to make was an easy log cabin block. This block uses 2.5-inch strips of fabric, all in different lengths, and the end product will be a quilt block that has pieces of fabric like going around, and one half is supposed to be a darker shade and another half is supposed to be a lighter shade. However, I'm learning that with making quilt blocks, you definitely want to pay attention to your sewing plan and make sure that you're putting all of the strips in the correct place. You'll see in the end why I say that. So anyway, for this project I used 3 different fabrics. The middle fabric, which was 4.5 by 4.5 inches. Fabric B, I call it, which has 4 different 2.5-inch wide strips at 6.5, 8.5, 10.5, and 12.5 inches. And then the third fabric, you also have 4 lengths of strips at 2.5 inches wide, and the 4 lengths are 4.5, 6.5, 8.5, and 10.5. And so with this block, you simply take the strips of fabric and you sew them around the middle block, and you're supposed to do it in such a way that you'll end up with kind of one side of the block with the second fabric and one side with the third fabric, and it looks like a cool block, kind of with blocks that look stacked on top of each other, I guess like a log cabin. So while I was sewing them all together, I pressed the seams, folding the seam toward the outermost piece that I just sewed, and that is how I decided to press the seams going all the way around the block. One of the issues that I found was the dark pink fabric was a little stretchy or not really stable. All of the fabric was 100% cotton, but that fabric in particular was not really stable, kind of moved around a little bit. And as you see with the end product, I messed up somewhere. I got one of these strips switched up and it didn't really come out exactly how it should have come out, but that's just another learning lesson. So the next quilt block that I decided to make is called an Amish diamond. And this quilt block has elements where you'll have triangles as well as squares incorporated into the block. So for this block, all I needed were 2 different types of fabric, and you cut them all in either squares or rectangles, and you sew them together in such a way that you'll make pieces that look like triangles. So for the first fabric, the flower type fabric, I needed 1 6.5 by 6.5 inch square, and then I needed 4 3.5 inch by 6.5 inch rectangles. For the second fabric, the flowery fabric or the pink type fabric, I needed 8 squares of 3.5 by 3.5 inches wide. And so to make the middle part, which is like the diamond, you take the larger 6.5 inch square and you put 4 of the pink flowery squares at each corner. You sew them from corner to corner of the smaller square, and then using a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, you cut away about half of that square. You fold it over and you press it under, and it looks like a diamond. And so once that was made, then you simply put the other pieces together to create the top, middle, and bottom panels. And I'm learning with quilting that you basically work in panels and then you sew them all together at the end, which makes things a little easier. And all of the quilt blocks that I made end up being the same size, the same finish size, which I think is 12 by 12 or 12 and a half by 12 and a half. So I thought that was cool that all of the blocks ended up being the same finish size, even though I used 3 different quilt blocks. But the end product, this quilt block was the only one that actually came out the way it should have come out. So for that reason, it's my favorites thus far. I think I really like this pattern. And in doing all these quilt blocks, I'm hoping to decide what quilt block I want to focus on for my first full-size quilt. The final quilt block that I did for this video was called the Friendship Star. And so this has elements of squares and triangles as well. And it kind of looks like a pinwheel going around the quilt block. And for this quilt block, I again only needed 2 different types of fabric. So for the first fabric, I needed one square that was 4.5 by 4.5 inches. And then I needed 2 squares that were 4 7/8 by 4 7/8 inches. For the second fabric, which is the pink fabric, I needed 4 squares that were 4.5 by 4.5 inches and 2 squares that were 4 7/8 inches by 4 7/8 inches. And for this block, you do a similar thing with the other block in that you put 2 squares right sides together and you sew it down the middle. No, actually, you don't sew it down the middle. You sew on either side of the diagonal, 1/4 inch on either side, and that will make 2 pieces that you can unfold, and it looks like 2 triangles were sewn together. So you do 2 square pieces together. You sew on either side of the center diagonal line 1/4 inch. You cut down the middle, and then you have 2 different pieces that look like 2 triangles sewn together. So that was fun. Then once you make those pieces, you lay out your pattern or lay out your blocks so that it creates the image that you wanted to end up with. And I thought I was being careful again, but obviously I again didn't pay attention to the placement of my blocks because 2 of the triangles are facing the same way when they're actually supposed to be facing opposite ways. So the top and the bottom triangles are both facing like to the right. And so it doesn't look quite like the Friendship Star where it's supposed to. So I messed up that one, but that's another learning lesson. I'll have to do better in the future and pay attention. So here are all of the 3 quilt blocks that I made for this video. I enjoyed this project. I think it's kind of a calming activity to create little quilt blocks just to practice sewing and creating something with different types of fabrics. I'm looking forward to learning about how to match fabrics, different fabrics so they look good together. But I'm excited about starting making quilts. Thanks for watching.